Welcome to Halftime. I'm Doug Piper, and I'm a halftime alumni from Greenville, South Carolina. And these events are actually part of my halftime journey. This is our 41st webinar event, and I want you to know how much I appreciate you joining us today. Now, I wanted to let you know there's something really great going on. We do virtual roundtables. There are 2 seats left for the upcoming roundtable seats. So if you want to find out more, click on the green button, maybe about the center of your screen there, and you can contact Lloyd and find out more about that virtual roundtable seat. Now, many halftime alumni experience rich and rewarding mentoring in their business. But when asked what they enjoyed the most in their day-to-day activities, it was growing individuals and leaders. Now, many halftimers really enjoy and find mentoring is a really important part of their second half. But lacking the former corporate structure, mentoring now seems a bit more difficult to approach. So, how do you find emerging leaders? What materials would you use? Is it prideful or awkward to offer mentorship to someone? Are there existing platforms out there that can help match up mentors to mentees? And what new skills or mentoring for whole life versus career are needed? Well, today we're going to be talking to Rick Woolworth and Lloyd Reebs about that very subject. Now, Rick is a longtime halftime alumni and mentee of Halftime's founder, Bob Buford. After following 35 years in Wall Street, he founded Telemachus. It's a community of experienced leaders engaged in mentoring, relationships, and intergenerational friendships. And in 2018, Rick and his wife Jill returned to Stanford for 18 months to take mentoring courses alongside graduate and undergraduate students. Lloyd and Rick have been friends for a long time and deeply engaged with this kind of work for over 20 plus years. Now, Lloyd Reeb is a successful real estate developer. He's the author of 3 books and the founding partner of Halftime. Now, today, this 30-minute webinar, we're going to glean simple ideas to begin mentoring. We're going to hear best practices, resources, and why mentoring can be so life-changing. Now, Lloyd, why do most people, I guess maybe many people that you've coached in halftime, why do they prioritize mentoring so highly?
Well, like you said, Doug, it's something that many of us enjoyed in our first half career and found to be deeply rewarding. And so it's natural to, when you look back and say, well, what was I really good at? What did I love doing? It's one of the things. And it's an easy way to give back. It dovetails with whatever else you create in your second half portfolio of serving roles. And then interestingly, it plays an important role in your own family and with your extended family. And, I really want to make an impact in the lives of my friends' kids. And these mentoring skills that I've been learning, those are important. I have a list of my friends' boys, for example, and 10 of them, and I have a standing appointment on my calendar each month to reach out to them. And all I'm really doing is using these same skills that I've been learning over the course of a long career to serve them and encourage them and help them. And then, but beyond that, I think we know that it's an important way to stay young and to keep learning, right? We learn from our adult children and from the people that we mentor. And then finally, I think, Doug, it's just, we're told to, in the Bible, to reach back and invest in the younger people coming up behind us. So a few examples, Rick, that come to my mind. You and I have been on this journey for many years together, and a few examples that come to my mind of halftime alumni that are doing this in very diverse ways are 2 buddies, Tim Sittema and Mark Linz, that simply got 9 or 10 young rising stars together and said, hey, if you'd like, you could come to our conference room every other Friday morning for an hour and a half. There's not really much curriculum. It's just what's up. And the conversations are deep and rich, and they don't have to prepare. They've been preparing for 55 years. They've been preparing to be able to bring wisdom, right, in a colloquial way. And Pat Hamill has a more structured way. Pat is of Halftime Alumni. He's the CEO of Oakwood Homes in Denver. And he has a team each year of emerging leaders, half of them from inside his business, half of them from the community. Some are for-profit, some are institutional leaders, some are nonprofit leaders. So it's a wonderful blend, and it has more structure to it than what Tim and Mark are doing. And then this is a fun story that's a trickle-down impact of yours, Rick, is Matt Holdquist and I. We are leading a group of emerging leader halftime roundtable. This is 6 very talented young people between 28 and 38. It has a process. We meet on Zoom 2 hours a month. And Matt, of course, was someone that you mentored. So this is sort of second generation impact. All 3 of those people, it fits into their life, into the other stuff they're doing, but it requires skill, and it requires some tools and a little bit of intentionality. So, Rick, tell us a little bit about, I mean, when I first got to know you many years ago, 25 years ago or whatever, you were deep into Wall Street. And I remember Bob's role in your life was deep and rich. But what drew you when you left Morgan Stanley to mentoring? And then share a little bit about the idea. Where does this idea of Telemachus come from in terms of Greek mythology, et cetera?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you, Lloyd and Doug. Lloyd, you and I go way back, and it's really I've been excited to do this conversation with you. So thanks for the invitation.
You're welcome.
And yeah, the question a lot of people are thinking is, what's a guy who spent 35 years on Wall Street doing in the mentoring business? It's not exactly the preparation that you would expect. And it's really for several reasons. The first, in the work context, I was really mostly engaged in client work, but from time to time, I was managing people. And when I did that, I really loved managing downwards and developing people, and I hated managing upwards. So that was one. 2 was I just started in my 50s particularly, started having breakfasts and lunches with younger people and just talking about life. And then I would say the main reason I am sitting in this seat talking to you all is Bob Buford. And our story with Bob started back in 1988. He invited us to a conference called The Foundation. And that was for emerging leaders around the country who had an interest in faith and how to integrate that with the rest of their life. And that conference, and we went every year for 15 years. We wouldn't miss it. And Bob became my most important mentor for what was almost 30 years until he died, Lloyd, 3 or 4 years ago.
Yep.
And so I want to really, this is fun for me to really honor Bob in this kind of way. And I would say too, that as far as Telemachus goes, in my 50s, I began to lose interest and some altitude on the investment business. And I had this shadow that was following me around and I couldn't shake it. And it essentially was, I had this vision of starting an organization whose mission was solely to mentor and come alongside emerging leaders and help them with their journey. And so 10 or 11 years ago, we started this thing called Telemachus. And I won't get into details as to all we do, but we have a conference and workshops and try to spend a lot of time with younger people and talking about life. And the name Telemachus, a lot of people don't realize that where we got the word mentor. And it was from Greek mythology, and in the Odyssey was written by Homer when Odysseus was going off the Trojan War, beginning the Odyssey. He found a man to be a surrogate father for his little son named Telemachus. And the man he found was named Mentor. And that is where we have the word mentor that we use so often.
So talk a little bit about why why mentoring is so important today. If you're in your at the threshold of your second half, why is this a strategic investment?
Yeah, it's a few years ago, it dawned on me that when it comes to mentoring and role modeling, we're in a whole new moment in human history, which is a pretty bold statement to make. And so when you think back, for thousands of years, younger men and women grew up in tribes and villages and urban settings, and they were always with the same people. They were with their family ecosystem of parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins. And then they were working with the same people, whether it was on the hunt, around the campfire, in villages, or in urban settings where they were in the factories or wherever. And so the mentoring and role modeling that happened back then was very organic. You were always with the same people. And things really changed with the millennials. And how many millennials are living in their hometown today? It's far fewer. And so they're so far fewer, and their work life is with a constantly changing senior people, because their jobs are turning over every 2.7 years, and they don't have their family ecosystem. And so what it means is that senior people and younger people are not spending time together like they were in the old days. And so when it was happening organically before, any sort of mentoring that happens today has to be intentional, especially on part of the senior people, but also on part of the younger people. So for that reason, we're in a whole new watershed kind of era.
And so many of the younger people that I have the privilege of mentoring, they describe to me how hard it is to find somebody who not only has lived a holistic life of balance and joy and impact, but that was willing to intentionally give back and then has cultivated the skills to do that. So it's a pretty rare commodity. And I know when Bob passed away, I went looking for another mentor, and it's not easy when you're 59 even to find another mentor that's 15 or 20 years older. So, one of the things that you've taught me is that mentoring is different from so many other things. They often get labeled underneath mentoring. So it's important to clarify what really we're talking about with mentoring and how different it is from other roles, for example, that I spend a lot of time doing, which is coaching.
Right. Well, when you think about mentoring, it's a word that we use all the time, and it's used in lots of different settings. And so there's all sorts of different roles that someone will say, that's my mentor. So someone at work is a great sponsor, and so that's my mentor. Or it's a career coach that's really helping me develop my skills. Or it could be a networking resource, someone who's helping me get jobs. It could be my mentor is someone who's an advisor for certain issues that I face, and so forth. So all these are very important roles, but I think they narrowly define and shortchange what mentoring really can be. So if you think of mentoring like the word coffee, so Lloyd, you and I, let's go get a coffee. Well, there's a lot of different choices of coffee, right? We can have Maxwell House Instant, we can have Green Mountain, Starbucks, Pete's. But Lloyd, I want to take you to the espresso bar we have up in Connecticut where it's the killer cup of coffee. And so, the espresso version of mentoring is when I'm mentoring to the whole life and not just their career or any individual issue. And so I like to think of a human being as represented by an iceberg. So Lloyd, I'm looking at you, and an iceberg has 10% of its volume and mass above the surface. And so I can be mentoring to you, or not you, but someone else, a younger person, and I could be mentoring to their career or another part of their life. But that person has so many other parts to him or her that I would love to have a conversation about from over time. So you think about their relationships, and if they have a marriage, their parenting, their values, their behaviors, their spiritual life, their finances. There's a lot of things that we can be talking about. And so that's the playing field, I think, of a mentor.
And then you've told me that most of the books in your study and research that you did for a year at Stanford, most of the books were 80% of the books or so were books about just career. And, when I sit down with these 10 young guys that I have the privilege of investing in, um, career is a small piece of it. It's an important piece of it, but so much of the nuances and so much of the pain that occurs in people's 40s and 50s comes from these other issues that no one really speaks into with any sense of credibility. Now, obviously, there's too many young people. There's millions of people you could pick from. So, kind of two questions: how do you decide who, and how do you find them? What kind of filters? Is it just who you bump into, or is there some way to know, do I have good chemistry with this person?
Yeah. Well, I like to say these people are all around you. And, we come in contact with younger people all the time. And there, on occasion, we're talking to somebody either, I don't know, at the gym or on the golf course, or just meeting them at a different event. And you have a nice conversation, and the blood sort of is flowing a little bit. And you have the opportunity to say, okay, George, I really enjoyed this conversation. What would you say if next week we pick a time and have a cup of coffee, or can I buy you lunch? And you're rarely turned down these days, because most young people are looking for mentors, and the statistics show it. So once you have that lunch or coffee, you'll know whether there's something to follow up on. And I like to say, date, don't mate. We don't have to get this done right away. Let's iterate on it and have a conversation, and then maybe another conversation. And over time, it begins to happen. And I will say one thing, that mentoring starts often for a reason. There's a presenting issue or two, and then over time it can become a season, and then hopefully for some of these it becomes a lifetime, and that's when it's really fun.
Yeah, and I find that someone that I might have mentored 10 years ago will call me back when they're in the midst of the adoption process, just to talk it through and see if I would sponsor them for that. And then the broader issues that we covered and I have in my notes, by the way, from 10 years ago, come back up, and I'll say, so Chatty, tell me about this, or how's that going? And you remember you had the propensity to be this way, and you were trying to change that. How's that going? And then the joys in their life, the joy this brings is absolutely profound.
And Lloyd, let me just add one thing to that I think people underestimate the real impact what mentors can have. And I know I've been with people, and they'll say, well, it's really great what you're doing, but the trouble with mentoring is it's so one-on-one, you just can't scale it. And I'll say, well, I'm not sure I really agree, because I think there's a multiplier effect that happens when you mentor somebody. If you help to change the trajectory of a young man or woman, over time, it doesn't matter in a short period of time, but over 50 years, these people live a long time. And the impact on their family and their family systems that could go for 3 generations or more. And then the organizations they're part of are lead, and then it's the communities they're part of, and for some even more. And so over a long period of time, the impact can be enormous. And I think you've seen that many times.
Well, yeah, and particularly when you part of your mentoring is to really help someone learn the joy of knowing what your purpose in life is and serving other people. Then you get 100x yield, because if you invest in 100 people and they invest in 100 people, you have compounding returns, and it becomes a lifestyle. I remember when Bob first agreed to help me, he said 4 things. He said, number one, Lloyd, it's up to you to set up the times with me. Number two, I want you to send me a note ahead of time that just tells me what's up. It's what Drucker had taught him. Drucker taught him to send him a long, rambling letter, he would say. Remember that, Rick?
Absolutely.
And I remembered thinking, what does the rambling mean? And what he meant was like unfiltered. Just tell me the essence of what the issues are. Don't filter stuff. Don't polish it for me. And then he said, the third thing was, tell me what you learned. And then the fourth thing is, tell me what the results were. He said, to me, the joy is in the results. So if you set some simple parameters up with the people you mentor, you're going to see compounding returns.
Yeah.
Now, talk us a little bit. I mean, you did an in-depth study and a long fellowship at Stanford, and you've written a Harvard Business Review and a Fast Company article on mentoring. So you know a lot about best practices. Just talk at our level about what are the most important best practices to be a really effective mentor?
Well, the first, I think an important point is there's no one way to mentor. Everybody needs to develop their own style based on their personality, their experiences, their interests, etc. But I do think there's some best practices that can really help people launch you as a mentor. And the first is a fairly simple one. Literally in every conversation I begin with a younger person, I'll say, tell me your story. You have 20 minutes, take your time, start at the beginning, and I'll ask some questions and just tell me your story. And if you want me to, I'll tell you my story. Never been turned down. And so it's a great place to start because you get so much context. Otherwise, this person is just a set of puzzle pieces in front of you. You're just trying to piece it together over time and you just never get a full picture. So sharing stories is one. And this sounds kind of hokey, but it really works, is to take notes. So when I'm with somebody, sometimes I'll pull out a piece of paper, but sometimes I'll just wait and till I get home and I will put in my contacts, name Lloyd Reeb, and in the notes section, I'll put March 24th, breakfast, and all that we talked about. It takes 5 minutes. But if I don't do that in 2 months, if we don't meet for a few months, I'll forget. And that's nothing's more embarrassing than we had this really nice conversation and you don't remember. Especially if you end up talking to a lot of people over time. And so that's an easy win. I think third, I mentioned two more. The third one is for people to be as authentic as possible about their own life. And millennials, and I think Gen Z that'll be coming behind them, really value authenticity. And so to the extent you can talk about your life and they're looking at your LinkedIn profile and seeing this nice straight line, and they don't understand that there's been a lot of squiggles and a lot of ups and downs. So to share a couple of things that didn't go that well in your life over time is really, I think, important. And lastly, and probably most important, best practice, just mentioning four here, are the questions you ask. The paintbrush of the mentor are questions. And so you want to also be quick with the questions and slow with the answers. Our job is to teach people how to fish, not give them the fish. So it's a discovery process on their part. I remember Bob, when I'd be tearing my hair out talking about an issue and we talk about it. And at the end of it, he said, you just needed to talk out your confusion. So questions are really important.
Rick, I remember the last lucid conversation I had with Bob before he passed away. I had a 20-minute slot and excuse me. He looked at me and he just said, Lloyd, what are you learning these days? Now think about that question. What are you learning these days? I mean, you could mentor somebody just with that one question. My mind just went scrolling through life. Like, what am I learning now? And one question was, well, maybe I'm not learning anything. And that's an indictment. And then, well, what is it? So I said to him, I'm learning contentment. And I told him that I changed all my passwords to contentment, Rick, because I thought it was a way, I do this little thing to remind myself, every day I got to type it in, contentment, and it just reminds me, you're learning to understand and live with contentment, because the Bible says godliness plus contentment equals great gain. And so he looked at me and he said, you caught up with your dream. That's what you do when you catch up with your dream. You hunker down and you savor you learn to savor the moments. Now, that conversation took what, 3 minutes, Rick?
Mm.
And it was a question with a simple observation from somebody who could see around corners. Like a mentor can see around corners. I couldn't. As soon as he said that, I realized, that's right, I've caught up with my dream. Who would think that you'd catch up with your dream, right? Did anybody ever tell you caught up with your dream? It was priceless to hear that from somebody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, so one last thing, and then we'll go to questions. And by the way, Doug, what's the process for folks we would love to see as many people as want to stick their questions in for Rick, because we've got Rick for another 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes.
Yeah, close to the bottom center of your screen, there's an Ask a Question link. Looks like we've already got 2 great questions in there, Rick. And so if you've got a question for Rick that we'll answer in the second half, just click down there. And if you have to run, you don't even have to wait till the end of the event. You'll actually get an email from the event when Rick is answering your question. And if you don't get to it right then, days or weeks later, if you click on it, you'll hear Rick's answer right at where you clicked, and you don't even have to watch the whole program. So I would encourage you to get those in. We'll do that in the second half.
Thank you, Doug. So, one last thing then, the 3 minutes we have remaining in this first segment, Rick, is just talk about the power of intentionality, that getting this stuff, picking somebody who, everybody you're going to mentor has a name. So write some names down, put it on your calendar. What have you learned about that? Just the importance of intentionality.
It's like anything else in life. It's just, you got to do it. If you haven't been mentoring, I just say, start doing it, and you'll learn what works. It's like anything we do. So, and I think particularly what I like to do is that if I have a first meeting, I feel like this conversation should continue. I'll say, why don't we schedule the next time we're going to meet, in 3 weeks or a month, whenever you want. Let's continue the conversation. So, that's a very easy, intentional way to mentor, to begin mentoring. And I think there are ways to leverage your mentoring that are very quick wins. So one is, one of the greatest assets of people on this call are our networks, the people we know in our careers and in our personal life. And to introduce a mentee to one of your friends is, I am constantly amazed at what has happened when I've done that. And it takes an email, and all of a sudden that has a whole life of its own. And another one is just following up a little bit with sending an article, and by email, or book titles or videos. And what I'll do sometimes with people is I'll leave them a voicemail, which is kind of old tech, or send them a text and just say, hey, Sam, I believe in you. Maybe I believe in you more than you believe in yourself, or something, some form of encouragement. That's rocket fuel for people, because they know you're thinking about it.
Oh my gosh, Rick, when Bob passed away, I went through all my letters from him and the books that he sent me. He and I both loved art, so he kept sending me used art books, and with a note in the front asking me to tear the pages out and stick them up in my dressing room or whatever, to learn. You said you learn art by watching it and looking at it. And those notes are all encouraging. So I scanned them and put them in my phone. I mean, you'd think at my age I didn't need that. I need that. When I get discouraged, I go back to letters he's written 22 years ago that are still producing results.
Yep. And Lloyd, one more thing I'd like to say about mentoring that I think that people often don't realize, especially our age, is I believe that mentoring has the highest ROI, the highest return on investment per unit of time of anything we do. That's a radical statement. And why do I say that? Because if you just spend 2 or 3 hours a month for a few months, you can change the trajectory of a young man or woman and change their life trajectory. That's like a couple episodes of This Is Us or some Netflix movie. It's just not that much time. If I spent that incremental time with Jill, it's great, but it's not going to change her life. Or even with my kids, it's not going to change their life. But a mentee, you can. And it's a win-win. How many win-wins are there out there in our culture? They're just.
And, speaking of Jill, I mean, think about this. She's in some ways mentored you or nurtured you over the years, right? She's a family therapist, marriage and family therapist. I've watched you change over time. She's invested in you. And I was watching her help you get the lights right and that stuff tonight and just thinking,
You did get it right.
She could teach this way better than you and I, and she's invested in you, and she's a wind at your back, and she prayed for you before we started, and there's a great example of mentoring. So Doug, we're at 8:30 or Eastern time, so we're at the bottom of the hour. Take it from here, and I think you had another question for Rick, maybe.
Yeah, I really did. Rick, not everybody makes it in time to catch the whole program tonight.
Sure.
So a few people might have slipped in late. So could you summarize, just kind of capsulize mentoring, its importance and significance going forward?
Well, that's hard to do in a minute. I just think this is what is more exciting and valuable use of time for people who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s to spend time with younger people. And the demand is huge. And we have had this sort of separation of the generations. This never happened before in history. And so it really is going to take people like us to be reaching to talk to these people and engage them. And you don't need to have a lot of training on this. Just begin conversations, follow up. And it just keeps getting better and better. And again, this is a win-win. Both sides get energized by this. I think this is one of the best parts of getting older.
That's a good point.
Well, thank you so much, Rick. This was fantastic. And I want to thank everybody that's joined us tonight for taking so much time to join us. Now, we try and keep these to 30 minutes, but we've got Q&A in the second half. The entire event is recorded, so if you've got to go, we understand it, but I would encourage you to stay for the Q&A. I think personally that's the best part because these are your questions, and maybe everyone is sharing them. And by the way, if you look at the questions, you can vote them up. So the most important question is answered first. So our first question, Rick, comes from Amy. And Amy asks, how long do you mentor someone? Is this a lifelong thing, or do you pick just a season?
Well, I think it can be any of the above. It can be a short time. That I've had some very, I think, pretty powerful mentoring relationships that only lasted a few sessions. We really accomplished a lot. And then there are others that do go for a season. And important part of life is of mentoring is just doing life together, spending some time together. You mentioned Jill. We have people come over for dinner. We'll go out for dinner with a mentee and their spouse if they have one, or their girlfriend or boyfriend, and just doing stuff together. Because one other important point we didn't cover so far was, I think people underestimate the power of being a role model. In many ways, role modeling may be the most important part you do. Now, it can be a bit daunting because you think, well, my life's not perfect, but they're always watching how you treat, the person who comes in and does the cleaning, or the waiter, or how you are operating at home. One of the best times I had with Bob was he spent the night and he could meet our kids. And that's just the fun of mentoring, is when you really get to know each other. And when it really gets good is it is for lifetime, and it becomes an intergenerational friendship. Why shouldn't we have friends that are 20, 30 years younger than us?
Well, that was a great question, and what an even better answer, Rick. So thank you for that. Amy, good question. We will move on. Tom has the next most popular question. Which model is preferred? A series of individual mentor relationships, which I've done for a number of years, or a group to scale it?
I'm a big advocate of one-on-one mentoring. And I think group mentoring takes it into a different realm. Really, can be really good, but it just has different dynamics. And I think, Lloyd may even be the one to speak better to that. But, there's people out there are so lonely, and, to show that you really care about somebody is very disarming. And that, you're sending them little notes, or, asking questions. Tell me your story. How many people have you had say, tell me your story? So I'm a big one-on-one type of person.
And by the way, we're going to send each of you Rick's Harvard Business article, Fast Company article, but also his questions, which I've got here, 2 pages of really profound questions. And I'm a student of good questions, and these are great questions. And one of the things that Bob taught both Rick and I is that our fruit grows on other people's trees, right? And so just the fact that he's willing to share this stuff with all of us after working hard to curate them. But wow, there's a skill piece to this, right, Rick? That learning those questions, you have to take the time to know the questions, make them your own, so you can use them in a one-on-one setting. One of the things with group coaching is you can have curriculum, you can follow it. It's kind of weird if you sit down with somebody at a coffee shop and you pull out a curriculum. So, you just have to learn these questions and the skill of how to ask them and how to listen. And by the way, I always take a yellow pad with me when I'm mentoring anywhere, on a boat or in a coffee shop, anywhere. Because I want them to know that I'm seriously listening. And that when I get home, this will go in my file that I keep with all the stuff that I care about them.
Mm-hmm. And just to punctuate a little bit more on some of the good questions, a question that I like to ask at some point of somebody is, what is success? You want to be successful. What is success? Have you ever defined it? And so what I'll say is, today, if you're 30 years old, no, we just time warped you to age 80. And we're going to have a wonderful dinner tonight for you to honor you. And people are going to say nice things. So by next time, I'd like you to write down 5 little bullet points of what you want people to say at your 80th birthday. It's a very good proxy for long-term success. And then we can work backwards and begin to map out your life to make sure you get there to those 5 goals. And so the goal of a mentor is to help someone flourish in all parts of life, right? But to get on that path and sustain it, because how many of us can begin to drift off course often because our priorities get kind of messed up. So anyway, what is success? If you said pick one question, that's my favorite.
Well, Tom asked a very in-depth question there, so thank you for that one, Tom. Louise has the next question. Workshops on coaching say it's best to ask questions instead of giving direct advice. What's your perspective on answering questions versus giving your opinion on what to do?
Well, as I mentioned before, I want to be very slow to give the answer if I have an answer. So, but at times you can't duck, and you can give your perspective, because the life of the millennial today, and certainly Gen Z behind them, it's complicated. It's different than it was when we grew up at that age. And it's only getting more so. And so I want to be very careful to say, here is the answer. It's really, here's my perspective on it. And let's keep working with this. And But really, what's your strategy in moving ahead on this particular issue? So I'm always trying to throw it back at them as much as possible.
This comes from Kevin, and Kevin asks, do you have an outline that you use when at the beginning of your mentoring process? Maybe a syllabus or a particular structure that you prefer?
I think everybody will do it differently, but I'm very much of kind of an organic, iterative kind of mentor. And so I want to just have a continuing conversation and unpacking. Often, it starts with an issue. One of the best questions to start with is to say, what's keeping you up at night? What is the biggest challenge in your life? And so let's work at that. And then I may ask some more questions about, okay, how's your marriage going? Or whatever. So again, I tend to lean towards keeping it more informal, but knowing where we're trying to help them on their journey.
All right. Our next question comes from David Wills. Is there training for becoming a mentor, or are there some tools that you recommend?
The topic of mentoring is it's amazing in that when you think about leadership, the topic of leadership, there is so much out there and keeps coming at you. It's a tsunami of it. When it comes to mentoring in a more of a whole life or a life mentoring kind of context, there's amazingly little. And so I hate to say, I think it was David, that there's not a lot of good resources out there that I've found. But I think John Wooden is, I think, one of the great mentors of all time. He was known for being the great basketball coach at UCLA, but he's got some books and one on mentoring. And I think that's one, but there's just far too few resources. And that's one of the things that I'm working on with a colleague and some others to get some more out there.
And David, one thing that we're doing is we've taken the halftime curriculum and created something called the Emerging Leaders Roundtable. So you can use that material to take, talented leaders that are 25 to 40 through a process that's Zoom-based. And really what we've done is taken all of the material that helps somebody at midlife and adapt that back to the age of someone that's pursuing a career that's likely to be, a senior leader when they're in their 40s and 50s, but is they haven't yet caused all the chaos in their life that comes by getting overextended in our careers. And then in addition, we're going to send you the mentoring questions that Rick has curated, as well as those articles. And then there's an article that Drucker wrote called Uber Mentor in Inc. magazine before he passed away. That's a helpful article. But I know you, and I know you're already a great mentor. So you've been a mentor to me in many ways. These children to be mentor ready and to be highly leveraged for their mentor, in addition to what Drucker and Bob required. So this is Ken Lober, wonderful halftime alumni. What can we do to get our kids ready for being mentored?
Well, one is and by the way, a really interesting question, can you mentor your own children? And I would generally lean towards that we can't, because they already know what you're going to say before you say it. And I know that I can get, Lloyd, you can talk to one of my daughters and get so much more out of them than I can. But as far as how to be a good mentee, I think one thing is to encourage them just to ask to approach somebody they respect and say, hey, can I buy you a cup of coffee? Would you be willing to do that? So one is to encourage our 20s or late 20s kids to just ask for the order, hey, can we have a cup of coffee? And to ask them about their life and to just get to know them. And then if you're having a good conversation, to say, hey, would you be willing to do this again. I really enjoyed it. We covered some good ground. And so let's say you get a second meeting or lunch 3 or 4 weeks from now. But be sure to go prepared to that meeting as far as having some questions to ask and to have thought about the discussion before. And as you were saying, Bob, that Drucker had a formula for what you should do as a mentee.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, it's really to be very intentional as a mentee, as well as mentors being intentional.
One other question from Bruce. White what's the best resource for one to tap into to leverage yourself into a best case mentoring process? So what's the best resource to get started that you know?
Oof. Well, I would hope that the Harvard Business Review article is one that it's got some good basic tools to get going. And but I think all the people in this call are very capable people, and I would just say just get in just begin to have those conversations, and it'll come pretty natural. This is most of the people in this call really are good at developing relationships, and that's what a mentoring relationship is.
Right.
Just a younger friend. And
drop your guard so they can see the challenges you face, because then it becomes real. And and I always say to my mentees, this is confidential. I'm going to share with you everything. What you share with me is confidential. So then I have the freedom to tell them things that, are just a little embarrassing or a lot embarrassing about me, So Rick, there's 4 or 5 more questions, so we'll move through them kind of quickly. What's a proven way to reignite a mentor relationship that was kind of getting stale or waning?
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with a relationship that begins to run out of steam. I think it's like a friendship, and not all our friends we're going to have for life. And so I don't get too worked up if I have a relationship that really was quite active. And in many ways, what we're trying to do is catch and release, is help them get on their path and ask them the questions and do some life together. And we want them to replicate. We want them to do what we've done with them. And that's part of the multiplier effect.
Yeah, so maybe it's a season for a new mentor. I had a mentor as a gymnast. I had a mentor in the retirement housing business. I had Bob mentoring me through midlife, and now I need a different kind of mentor in this season.
Lloyd, I think this is a really important point, and one to emphasize with coaching our young people to get mentors is you need multiple mentors. You need a portfolio over time, because one person can't check all the boxes and can't help you with everything. And so be expansive on this over time.
We may not be successful in all areas. How do we know we're ready to mentor people?
I think an important point, you're never ready. You're never successful. So I think actually, to the extent that you don't have it all figured out is good. And the fact that we may have some parts of our past that didn't go so well, or we made some big mistakes, who better to help somebody with marriage than someone who maybe it didn't work out and they learned some really good lessons. And if I had to do it over again, I would do this and this. And so I say all the people on this call are plenty capable and should just get going. You're as ready as you ever will be.
Don't let that stop you is what I'm hearing.
Not at all. It makes you more qualified.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Good question. So Paul asks, where do you draw the line on where mentoring will go? Life gets complicated. Marriage issues, work advice, vision casting, goal setting. So where do you draw the line on just how far mentoring will go?
Well, I'd like to think that most of the issues that we face in life would be fair game for a mentoring conversation. I think there can be a couple where you should draw the line. So, for instance, if someone's marriage is really, really hurting, and you don't want to try and play, marriage therapist. To have them talk to a marriage coach. We'd like to call it coaching. Everybody needs coaching. Get it for your marriage. Or if someone has some psychological or some issues that just start feeling kind of, I'm out of my league. I think that's certainly helping them to get some help that they may need, seeing a psychologist or psychiatrist or whatever. But I think, most other issues, I don't know, Lloyd, would you agree with me that most other things are?
Yeah, I think you also want to check with your own spouse and kids about what you share about your own family. We had a child with a significant health issue, and she's never been sensitive to that, but I think it's important to ask permission to share that kind of thing and how you work through it, So that's the only thing I can think that's off limits, but I like to try to get out on the table the things that I find the most embarrassing or wasteful things that I did that I wish I didn't do in hopes of saving them what Bob used to call the dumb tax.
Oh, good question, Paul. So Kevin asked this one: how would you differentiate a mentor from a good friend?
Well, I believe that a good mentor is a good friend. And so are they different? I'd say I like to think that a mentor's heart is really to grow, as Bob used to say, to grow fruit on other people's trees. My job is to bless and not impress. And so in that context, is that different than friendship? Maybe a little bit, in that I'm really here to be helpful. Now, the good news is I get as much as the mentee does. But I think that heart of, I just am here to help you flourish in all parts of life over time and be a friend and be an advocate and be an encourager. And so that's a bit different than just a peer friend.
And maybe recognize that there's going to come a time later in life when you really need their help and their advice and perspective. And we've been mentoring our kids in one way or another. And I'll tell you now, I send my roadmap every year to our kids in December, and I say to them, "Hey, Carter, or Carrie, I really need your advice. Could you look my plan over and let me know what you think? What would you change? How would you improve on it?" There's two things happening there. I'm continuing to teach them how to be chief life officer by modeling it, like you were saying, Rick, that modeling, but also they're mentoring me. I remember one year I said to Rick, on my plan, I wanted to learn how to hear the Spirit of God more clearly. And my daughter, Carrie, said, "Dad, just ask him to turn up the volume." And I thought, I didn't know the Spirit of God had a volume control. And, it was just, she was teaching me.
And that certainly happens too as they grow and mature over time. If it's for a season or a lifetime, I certainly just prize the time I have with people I've been in, with the Matt Holdquist, who I've known and really well for 10 years. He's been telling me stuff and asking me questions that really begins to he's doing what we want him to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, I send Matt my roadmap, and he gives me critique.
All right. Our next question comes from Harry. How would you compare mentoring to making disciples?
Well, in many ways, Lloyd, you may be more equipped to answer that question than I do. I think that when I think of discipling, it's tends to be more focused on spiritual development, and that's a good thing. And however, again, I like to open the aperture as much as possible. That it's not just about that; it's about a lot of other things. So that would be a bit of a differentiator for me. Again, both are good.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what Jesus said, if we're following Jesus, he said in Matthew 11:20, he said, "Walk with me, work with me. I'll teach you the unforced rhythms of grace." And I think that's the ultimate discipleship, is walk with me, work with me. I mean, it's not just about going to the golf course. I mean, there's stuff to do on this planet. And let's get busy together, and then we'll learn how to live those unforced rhythms of grace and following God.
What's the greatest gift a mentee can give a mentor?
So I do think it's really important that mentees be aware of and think about ways that they can give back or help a mentor. And so, one thing I've done in the past is to try and coach or help out one of their children who's got a math issue, or maybe they need some help with a sport I have some proficiency in. Or one thing I've done in the past for people who've mentored me is I'll send flowers to let's say it's a man, I'll send flowers to their wife and say, thank you for being married to such a wonderful person. And so I think be creative. Just sending a note and saying how much they've meant to you. So I think, again, be creative, and it's not hard.
Good. Well, we should probably stop there, Doug? It's getting close to the end of the hour.
Absolutely. We're at the top of the hour, and I thank everyone for enduring a few technical issues we've had, but they have not overshadowed what an amazing discussion that we've had tonight on mentoring. It is just excellent. So Matt says, excellent thoughts, Rick. Much love. We've had people from all over just full of great comments, and we just appreciate everybody attending tonight. Now, this is recorded, and it's exactly the same link as the registration link that you're here. So you're welcome to share that out with someone that you think would like to view it. Also, remember, contact Lloyd. Click on the green button there in the bottom center of the screen if you want to find out about the opportunity about 2 virtual roundtables that we've got coming up. And then, isn't there a leadership program, Lloyd?
There's an emerging leader for young leaders like this that we'll start another roundtable. So if you have a son or a friend that's 25 to 40, that's an emerging leader that would benefit from all the same stuff we take people through at halftime, but adapted down to their age and their situation in life. This is something Matt Holdquist and I have created together, and it's absolutely, we've just been blown away at the impact of it. And it's affordable. It fits into the little time slot they have at lunch, so it doesn't take away from family time. And just click on that and let me know, and we'll get them engaged. So, Rick, love you, and Jill, and thanks for your friendship. And Doug, thank you for your friendship and doing these together. It's a joy. And we'll say goodbye to everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening. We appreciate your time. Look forward to seeing you in the next few weeks. Bye-bye.